Great. So welcome to Scotland's National Food Debate. I'm Vicky Allen and I'm a journalist for the Herald. I'm the environmental correspondent, so there's a lot of crossover between, I think, what we'll be talking about today and what I cover. Before we begin, please note that the fire exits are located left and right. I can't actually see them, but I mean, they are supposedly left and right. And in the event of an alarm, please follow the stewards. There's not an alarm scheduled, so we would need to leave. Please be aware that tonight's event is being recorded and live streamed. So by participating in the event or asking a question, you're consenting to appear in the footage. If you'd rather not be recorded, please move to the very back of the room there, where the cameras won't pick you up. I don't know if anyone wants to move now, but just do it in the next few minutes. The event is being hosted by the Scottish Food Coalition, and it's a diverse alliance of over 75 organisations working for a just transition to a fair, healthy, sustainable food system. Their members come from across the food system, including those concerned with poverty, health, biodiversity, climate change, and animal welfare, as well as trade unions, food producers, and retailers, international development organisations, and faith groups. Established in 2015, they were instrumental in securing Scotland's Good Food Nation Act. And of course, we've had the publication of Scotland's first National Good Food Nation Plan. Continued pressure on household budgets, uncertainty around food security, significant public health challenges, and a farming sector under severe strain. Food policy, therefore, has become a defining issue for this election. As your impartial chair, I'm here to make sure as many questions can be asked in the time we have, which is 2 hours. And I ask that the panel respond with integrity, mutual respect, and without resorting to spin. For our audience here, there are hundreds of you here in the room and outside, hundreds across the streaming of the online streaming. So please respect everyone's right to be heard and ask direct questions rather than comments or reflections. For the candidates, you're going to have about 2 minutes each to answer some of the questions, but if you want to just keep it even shorter and sharper, fire ahead. I'll introduce the candidates and then let you know how the evening will work. My list I've got here isn't in the right order, so forgive me if I take a little moment. So we have, I will introduce you to the panel by party and where they have a current candidacy. So we've got Julie here, Julie Perrone, who's the Scottish Conservative candidate for Clydesdale. Then we've got Ariane Burgess, Scottish Greens candidate for the Highlands and Islands region. Then we've got Eleanor Ryan Saha, Scottish Labour candidate for Edinburgh Northern. Then we've got Ray Georgeson, Lib Dem candidate for Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire. Paul McLennan, SNP candidate for East Lothian Coast and Lammermuirs. And finally, Stephen Grant, Reform candidate for Cumbernauld and Kilsyth. So we're here for a robust but respectful debate. We have a zero tolerance policy for harassment and disruption. Everyone's voice matters. We have all the people that I mentioned about joining online and all different ages and beliefs. So please be mindful of that throughout the evening. I encourage you to listen respectfully, to try not to heckle, and to ask short, specific questions. So to make sure the discussion includes everyone, we're using Slido to manage questions. And if you're in the room, you can scan the QR code, which is just up there. And then you can enter the code. I think the code's just there. You can see it, but it's 304397. And then the passcode NFD 2026. And if you're joining online, you should already be on Slido with the stream on the left and questions appearing on the right. If you see a question you agree with on Slido, please give it a thumbs up rather than submitting it again, as this helps us sort of navigate what are the really important questions. And if watching online, when submitting a question, you can also click labels just so we know your location. Okay, we have a moderator looking over questions to prevent too many duplicates and make sure we get questions from a broad range of topics. As your host, I'll be picking up the questions from Slido as well as taking questions from the room. So be ready to put your hand up if you want to put in a question. Candidates will be asked to respond to each question in turn. I'll cut anyone off if they're speaking over time or moving too far off topic. And I'll try to ensure all candidates are given an equal opportunity to contribute. However, we're also going to encourage a bit of respectful debate. If you're on social media, use the hashtag #NatFoodDebate and tag in the Scottish Food Coalition. So I'm going to start by asking the first question, which panelists were already sent in advance, and that is, what is the one thing your party would do to support Scotland's Good Food Nation ambitions? Just see, yeah, Julie.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear me with this microphone and I'm not too close to it. Yes, I've got a thumbs up. The first thing I would do would be to make sure that everybody has access to food that meets their needs. No one should go hungry and no one should be going out in 2026. I suspect that all of us will say exactly the same thing. I think it's really important that we work in partnership and collectively across the whole sphere of people that are concerned about food or involved in food, so that our food is cheaper in our supermarkets, so that it's easier to access. Some of our communities, particularly some that I represent in Clydesdale or those that I represent in the Scottish borders, have very small shops and they pay a premium for their food. And we see a lot of collective collaboration to try and bring in food to help them. And that's wrong. I don't think it should matter wherever you are, how you access food and how it should not all be the same price. You'll notice that, I'm sure, if you go to Tesco Extra, it's slightly more expensive than you go to one of their bigger stores. And I think we need to end that kind of monopoly on food. It should be as cheap as it possibly can, but still reward the farmers, particularly who are bringing it in. And I think the second thing I would do to help our farmers would be to stop the family farm tax. That is one of our key policies in Conservative. And also put more money into the Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands budget, which will be cut by £40 million in this coming year. That, as far as I'm concerned, is unacceptable. And as Conservatives, we would make sure there is more money available to our farming and islands and rural communities so that they have better access to food, but also better access for our farmers as well, being able to sell their goods to market and bring them. They actually travel quite a long way at the moment because we don't have very many abattoirs or places they can sell their foods. You will know that our series of markets have gone down and down and down over the years. And that's probably all I'm going to say on that question. I'm going to pass it on.
Okay, great.
Thanks. Good evening, and thanks for that good starting question. I think I want to start in the systemic space. So the Scottish Greens are very keen to see that human rights bill come forward in the next session. It was promised last session, so that we know work has been done on it, and we want to see food and the right to food and the right to healthy environment be absolutely at the heart of that. We need to move from a needs-based approach, which we currently have, that has food banks and things like that, to a rights space. So we're moving to a space of dignity and entitlement rather than actual charity when it comes to people going hungry. The Good Food Nation Act was phenomenal work on behalf of the coalition. Thank you for everyone who really pushed hard on that. But as we know, it was a framework act. And I think the human rights bill coming in will help to put some more teeth into that space, give it that legal underpinning that we need with the right to food and the right to healthy environment. And I think that will also help with our local place plans that are hotly anticipated coming from councils and health boards, and help them move to being compliant if there's a human rights piece that they need to eventually respond to, so that it's meaningful, it's not just aspirational. And again, also with the Food Commission, if we have a human rights approach to food and healthy environment, then the Food Commission is going to also have to engage meaningfully and have much more thorough conversations with civil society. And also what we want to see, the Scottish Greens want to see, is legal aid properly funded, so that when people actually want to challenge their rights, if they're not getting what they're entitled to, there's funding and there's advice for them to actually take that forward. And finally, as many of you know, I worked very hard in the Good Food Nation Act to make sure that we actually had a Scottish Food Commission. That was something that colleagues of mine even said, give up on it, just go for commissioner. And I kept my foot in the door with the Cabinet Secretary, and I said, we absolutely need to have that commission, because local authorities need that support from the commission to make sure that they can take forward plans, and also the health boards can take forward those plans that are really meaningful. So we've worked very hard on this, and I'm committed to continuing to collaborate with all of you in the future.
Thank you.
Good evening. Scotland needs change. To answer this question, I'll highlight two key aspects of our change policies that I'm particularly excited about. The first is poverty. We know hunger is not a food problem, it's an income problem. We'll tackle food insecurity by tackling poverty in a meaningful way. No more can we have 1 in 4 children living in poverty in our constituencies. We need to make life more affordable. We need to get the economy moving again. We need to tackle the housing emergency in a meaningful way. And we absolutely need to provide childcare for parents. The second aspect that I'm really proud of as a member of Scottish Labour is the emphasis we have on pushing decision-making into communities and out of Holyrood. This hasn't been the trend for the past 20 years. Now, in my own urban constituency of Edinburgh Northern, we have a wealth of community growing, rewilding, and agroecology initiatives that I'm super proud of. I know that when we deliver on Scotland's Good Food Nation, it will be by empowering local people. We'll work meaningfully and collaboratively with local producers and local organisations wherever possible, because these are the people who are best placed to understand the issues that they're facing and their own industries. We'll work with farmers to make business easier for them. Doing business in Scotland is really hard just now for farmers and other folks, and that needs to change. We'll promote Scottish food industry through Brand Scotland, and we'll support our blue economy with a new marine plan. And crucially, across Scotland, we'll deliver fair, multi-year funding for both councils and charities, so that long-term plans that are essential for the work they do on our Good Food Nation ambitions can be carried out.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. My starting point on this question of one thing was to search my inner policy wonk, because I've worked in various kind of policy-related jobs in over the years. And I would say that the challenges that we face are too complex and interdependent to simply focus on one thing. But I'll have a go. The connections between food policy, farming, climate change, poverty, cost of living, the geopolitical stresses that we see, and supply chains really don't lend themselves to oversimplified answers. But there are principles to govern our activities and our actions, and Liberal Democrats' principles would include, as indeed others have said, local decision-making wherever possible, strong focus on sustainability, tackling poverty, and investing in local food production, and not just farmers, very important, but local community groups and brilliant organisations that do great work on a very very local level, need to be supported for a healthy nation. We supported the Good Food Nation legislation. We'll be supportive of future efforts to determine targets and a focus on delivery next, including supporting the new Scottish Food Commission. Needs to be allowed to get on with its important job. So my one thing, I did try to answer the question specifically around one thing, would be to start with a review of procurement policy to support homegrown food. This is in the national interest and it's essential for our health and our security. We should work together to set targets for proportions of homegrown food in public sector procurement. This is an area we can control. And from there, work should follow to support producers and processors to engage with tendering, package of other measures that will support Scottish farming and food production to deliver those targets. With an additional priority, I would suggest to start to extend and prioritise more production of fruit, vegetables and pulses in Scotland to increase self-sufficiency and reduce dependency that we have on those increasingly fragile import supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and first of all, thank you for the invite today. I've been MSP in East Lothian for the last 5 years, and East Lothian is a mixture of rural and urban. I was also a member of Sustaining Dunbar Transition Town movement way back in 2010. I think the SNP is proud to have delivered the Good Food Nation Act in 2022, and of course the Good Food Nation plan just in the last December, and we all know about the outcomes. I think Ariane's touched on one of the key things. I think there's a Human Rights Act and the right to food, which I think we need to be moving on as soon as possible. And I think one of the priorities for the next Parliament, as well as obviously, is publishing and fully funding the 26 to 31 delivery plan. We've talked about the importance of the Food Commission. I think there's importance as well around about expanding free school meals and breakfast clubs, and I think that's part of our manifesto. Child poverty is incredibly important part of that as well, and we know that child poverty in Scotland is about 9 to 10% lower than it is in the rest of the UK, because that is the importance of the Scottish Child Payment. Having a farming community as well, I think there's Tier 3 agricultural support from 2027, which I think is incredibly important, and I engage a lot with the NFU in terms of that. And there is a desire to how we look at organic production and get more sustainable food into shops, schools and hospitals, and procurement's a really important part of in terms of that as well. One of the key other points I think for me is I engage quite a lot with the East Lothian Climate Hub. And I think we can talk about what we do nationally, but how we embed that locally is incredibly important. So how do we support the climate hubs and doing the work that they do? And I think that's enhancing local change in terms of this. And I think the good thing, the Good Food Nation, for me, it's about warmer, healthier, more prosperous communities and stronger local economies. And that's one of the key things as well. This is about delivering stronger local economies as well into that. So I'm looking forward to the discussions tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Stephen.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. Reform UK, not surprisingly, takes a slightly different approach. The Scottish Government's Good Food Nation plan has many noble aims, but typically it's dressed up in the SNP dogma of independence and net zero, which does nothing but to increase the costs for many working people in this country. Reform's approach is different. We don't want a just transition to net zero. We want simply just a transition back to common sense. We want the farmers to be able to farm again. We want to see an end to the rewilding and the solar and battery farms that are now currently being put forward. We want to stop subsidising empty fields and grow food. We want to ensure that the farmers have less paperwork and can spend more time producing their food and to a fair price. We want to ensure they get good money for their beef, their lamb and their other produce that they have. Reform UK also wants to have British food for British people, with Scottish produce as the gold standard in our UK-wide market. We also want to see public procurement favouring local produce so that schools and hospitals can have Scottish produce and not other stuff. That will support local jobs and will also ensure people can maintain their livelihoods. We also want to tackle the cost of living by cutting the green levies that increase energy costs for bakeries, abattoirs, kitchens and all sorts of food establishments and supermarkets all over the country, because lowering energy costs is one sure way to make sure that nutritious food can be made available more affordably. If you consider what this SNP government did with this Procurator Fiscal's office in Elgin for net zero, they spent £3.5 million on a property that was only worth £275,000 to make it net zero ready. And yet that building, that money could have provided more than 1 million school meals or funded local hub processing for Scottish beef and veg to stay in our communities. Scotland as a future is as a part of the powerhouse within the UK. We support the good food nation and high quality production, parental choice, with a booming rural economy, but without the net zero madness that's costing us everybody every day. So let's stop the paperwork, stop the posturing, and let Scotland feed the nation once again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So a variety of different views, but also some themes coming through around producing homegrown food in Scotland, local economies and right to food. I am going to throw it open to the floor for a first question. I'm just thinking maybe the woman there in the floral top, yeah? And I'm sure I'll come to others of you later. If you could just introduce yourself and say where you're from.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Cara Hilton, and I'm here tonight from Trussell. I would like to say that Scotland can't be a good food nation when 1 million people face food insecurity. So I'd like to know from each of you what action you will take to end the need for charitable food aid in Scotland if you're elected. Thank you.
So yeah, that's what action you will take to end the need for charitable food aid in Scotland. And we'll start with Ariane this time. If we just pass it down, yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks very much, and great to see you, and thanks so much for the question. Yeah, I think a big part of it is actually making sure that there's more money in people's pockets in the first place. So we, Scottish Greens, want to see fair work, fair employment, people being paid properly for the work that they actually do. And then the other things that we want to see is things like income maximization offers within schools, within GP practices, and where and other places where people can access that type of service, so that we make sure that people who are entitled to income in their pockets absolutely have it. As I said in my opening, I think we really need to be moving to entitlement and dignity rather than charity. But some of the things that we've been doing already, the Scottish Greens, is we've been making sure that there is good food for young people in schools. So we worked on the school meals for P1 to P5, and then we got that expanded in the last session, and now there's a pilot for high schools as well, so that young people that are showing up at school are actually being able to concentrate on their education and their learning rather than being worried about food in their belly. We've also managed to get breakfast clubs as well in the mix there. Something else that we were instrumental in is after COVID, the UK government wanted to end the Scottish Child Payment. The Scottish government kept that on. And we actually, Scottish Greens, my colleague Maggie Chapman and colleagues she works with, identified another £5. So we were able to increase that Scottish Child Payment. And what we want to see is that increase in the next session, so going up to, by 2030, by £55. So getting more money into people's pockets so that they actually have the choice about how they want to spend their money on their food.
Thanks, Ariane. Yeah, Eleanor.
Thanks for the question. So, to restate my previous focus, Scottish Labour has a really robust approach to poverty. We want to tackle the root causes, and we absolutely acknowledge that food poverty is a human dignity issue as well as everything else. So we have to look at it through that lens, and we have to talk about national food sovereignty, but also personal sovereignty and family-level sovereignty over food and the ability to feed yourself in a way that is nutritionally balanced, but also culturally appropriate and that maintains dignity. One aspect of Labour policy that I'm really thrilled about as a charity worker and a former primary school teacher is that we've got a commitment to what we're currently calling family network hubs in schools, and I think these will be really instrumental in delivering the kind of empowering change that we need to see in many communities. They're the Sure Start models, and I'm a huge fan, and I think that the data shows that these were incredibly successful as a model, and we can do it so well in places like Edinburgh Northern, where we can work with schools to empower local communities. So a lot of the way that we'll tackle food poverty is to tackle the causes of poverty head on. In addition, growth is absolutely essential, and Labour's plan for growth is comprehensive, it's well thought out, it's got vision, it's got ambition, it includes everything from a wide-scale reform of the business rates to promoting Brand Scotland, which is directly relevant to the food and drink industry. So growth, and a sustainable growth, and growth that is working towards a net zero target in 2045, absolutely, is absolutely essential to delivering the kind of empowerment that will economically work in tandem with the changes that we'll see when we start doing preventative, proactive, empowering work in the communities with Sure Start style interventions.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's a very good question, and really what I would have to say builds on other colleagues' comments so far. I think, because it's a complex web of actions that needs to be taken, it is right to say, that we need to focus on economic growth of the right sort, sustainable economic growth, and that spreads wealth and income around the nation more fairly. Of course, it would help. I think there are huge challenges in our economy. We've had 10 years or more of, in fact, it's longer than that, of sluggish economic growth, not just because of Brexit, but it's certainly a big element that we need to remember. I would focus on one thing just to kind of lob in at this stage, which may seem a bit tangential, but it isn't. The cost of food waste in our society, the last time it was measured, we're still wasting somewhere over 1.2, 1.3 billion pounds worth of food at household level every year. And, Scotland has made great strides in that space in recent years, but still has more to do, and more support from local authorities and indeed from government to help households would save everybody a wee bit of money as well, which would certainly help. Many more dimensions to this complex question, but I hope that adds to the conversation that's taken place so far. At some point during the course of the evening, I would like the opportunity to come back on the net zero issue that was raised earlier by Stephen.
Yeah, I think there could be an opportunity for that. Thanks, Ray. Yeah.
Thank you, and it's a good question, Cara. I think the Scottish Government, I said in my opening statement, has a good record on this. We all need to be doing more. I think child poverty rates are 9 to 10% lower in Scotland than they are in the rest of the UK, and that is down to the Scottish Child Payment. In terms of this, obviously, it started, and it's only part of the UK that does that, and we're increasing that to £40 to children under one. I think it's trying to, how can we lessen the burden of people who are there at the moment? The school meals and the breakfast clubs are an important part of that as well. And I think one of the key things that the Scottish Government done as well was talking about fully funding, abolishing the two-child cap, and it took the UK Government 2 years to do that, and that's welcome. I think there's obviously the Child Action Poverty Plan, which we'll probably get into more details in terms of that as well. I think it's trying to lessen the costs on families as well. Childcare expansion, for example, is being proposed by the Scottish Government from 9 months to 4 years, and I know that will take burden away from that as well. And there is economic growth, and I think one of the key things, one of the key debates that we need to have here tonight as well is about having a progressive taxation system in place. If we want to have all these, if we want to eradicate child poverty, we need to have a progressive taxation system in place. I know that's an element of a debate within all the parties at the moment, but we need that. If we want to try and eradicate child poverty, we need a progressive taxation system that enables that and feeds that.
Thanks very much, Paul. Stephen?
It's a very good question, but strangely enough, it's very rare for me to agree with the Scottish Greens. But on the point of putting more money into people's pockets, I agree wholeheartedly. We need to put more money into people's pockets. That's why Reform are proposing tax cuts as part of our manifesto for the Scottish election. That's why we want to reduce the energy costs by getting rid of all the green levies. We want to put more people have more money of their own so they can make their choices for food. We also want to make sure that the food itself is at the lowest possible cost. And that's what we're trying to do with reducing energy prices. So very much, strange as it is to agree with the Greens, we do need to get more people having more money in their own pockets so they can make their choices as to what they want for their food. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And if we can just somehow get it back along this end for Julie. Thank you.
I'll be the third person that says something very similar. It's about putting more money in people's pockets. It's about reducing the tax burden for those who pay tax, particularly in that middle bracket, because I think food banks that are run by the Trussell-Tough are seeing much more people who are in work, working really hard and having no money in their pockets. So certainly as Conservatives, we put more money in their pockets by reducing the tax burden on them, giving them more money in our household income. So we have said that we would give all households in Scotland, using the underspend money that sits in the Scottish Government, about £200 a year to people, and £100 on top of that, using the renewables funds to get the money back into communities if that's what they want to do. But it's also about having cheaper food. And as an education portfolio holder, breakfast clubs, after school clubs, school dinners are really important. I support the pilot that's coming on to have high school children being able to get access to food. I think good food and food that they want to eat that is locally sourced would be really helpful. Greg's might not like me very much for saying that, but that's where all our children are going because it's cheap. Is it the best for their health? Probably not. But if we can do that in our own schools, and we're trialling some of that in the Scottish borders, that's where we will make a difference. Because if children learn it early on, and some of the work that the Trussell Trust do about helping people to work out low-cost cooking is something that we need to do a lot more of across the country. And I'd like to see some pilots on that too.
Thank you, Julie. I mean, there's actually plenty of questions here that I think are going to touch on net zero, so you will be able to bring it in. And in fact, this first one on Slido actually does engage with climate. How will you change the farm subsidy system to deliver for climate and nature? And could we go first with you, Eleanor, for this one?
Thanks for the question. That came online, is that right?
Yes, yes, Slido, yeah.
I've never used Slido, this is fantastic.
I think a lot of people are feeling that way.
Yeah. How would we change the farm subsidy system is a great question. We know that 65% of our land is agricultural land, and although I'm an urban constituency, I think we could extend that concern towards farming practices into our cities as well. I've already alluded that we've got a really strong agroecology practice in my constituency. We know that we need to modernise the agricultural system of support. We need a fairer system. We need to level the playing fields between big and small businesses. And we also back the nature-friendly farming practices, which I think is a key aspect of achieving this change. So we'd have a step-change approach to the nature-friendly farming practice by the end of the Parliament, is what we're pledging. But we'd have these funding changes properly phased in so that there'd be no cliff edges for folks involved. We need to simplify the regulatory system for farmers and for all business owners. The rules need to be clear, proportionate and practical, and we need to reduce red tape. And we need to value farmers as providers of food, guardians of our countryside, and really value their impact on growth that this country so desperately needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. So hard, because I agree with almost everything you just said. But you know, this is fine, because, you know, where we can find points of consensus and agreement, we should acknowledge them and recognise that nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. I think, from my perspective, from the Liberal Democrats, you know, we know that the farmers have had a bad deal for a long time. Most of the farmers I know want to do the right thing to kind of be productive and you know, care for biodiversity and care for the environment as well, and be nature friendly. The system does need to modify to support that. We want to see more security for farmers over the longer term, and that means a 3-year funding cycle as a minimum to allow the farming sector to plan a bit more and have a little bit more, stability and security. It's such a fragile industry at the minute. There are bigger issues at play that are factors in getting us back to a healthy, productive, and growing farming sector. It would be quite good to get back into a sensible trading arrangement with our European partners in terms of bespoke customs union that would encourage the right levels of trade across Europe, that would certainly help part of our farming industry, and so much more. But I do think that element of security and to be honest, changing the mindset really around celebrating the value of the farming industry, recognising their importance to society, to the economy, to the ecology, and make sure that the funding regime recognises that and gives them a degree of longer-term planning security would be my priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the key things, coming from East Lothian, I mentioned about it's a mixture of rural and urban. There are 180 farms in East Lothian. I engage with NFU quite actively in terms of this. It's probably one of the biggest contributors to our local economy in terms of the GVA, but also in terms of the number of employment and the supply sector as well. I think there's a number of things. Listening to them and speaking to them, the national insurance contribution rise hasn't helped the farming sector at all, and I think that's still feeding through. In terms of the inheritance tax issue, again, was a major issue that came forward quite strongly in terms of that as well. So we have to listen to them in terms of that. I think Ray touched on it. Leaving the EU hasn't been good for the farming sector, hasn't been good for the Scottish economy in any way, shape or form. So I think we need to rejoin the EU and be very active in terms of that. I think the direct payments, I think, is something that the Scottish Government have been listening to farmers around about. So how do we, for example, increase organic food growth? How do we then make sure around about procurement as well, which again is a really important issue. We have hospitals and schools in East Lothian that have to travel, get their food travelling from 100, 200 miles away. That's just, that shouldn't be the right way. We should be self-sufficient as much as possible in terms of this. But again, it's listening to the sector in terms of this. But we also have community farms in East Lothian as well. And again, it's how do you grow the broader sector? It's not just the commercial sector, but we have community farms. So how do we encourage and promote community farms as well, which I think is incredibly important.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, there's a number of things there in the last two panellists I would have to disagree with. For a start, Scottish beef has gone from 35 million to almost 180 million since we left Brexit. So to say that Brexit has been bad for the farming community is not really the case. One of the things Reform wants to do, we want to be able to pay the farmers, not the landowners, the farmers who actually farm, so they can get more of their share rather than the landowners. We also want to cut carbon audits, remove them completely, and change the LFA, which is for 86% of the agricultural land in Scotland does not have high quality. We want to change the rules around that to benefit farmers. So there's a lot we can do for farmers without going back to Brexit, going back into the European Union, because that is not the way forward.
Great. We could just have it along here for Julie. Yes, I know.
For me, the farming community is really important to Scotland. It's always been there for centuries and it should still be supported. I've already said I would cut the family farm tax because there's so much uncertainty for our farms that it's not really helpful to them. They're worrying about those rising costs, and we're seeing that again with fuel going up. Most farmers put red diesel in their tractors and that's not helping them. I certainly would increase the budget. If there's been a cut to the rural affairs budget in the last year, then as Conservatives we would be putting at least 50 million into that fund, and we would also be looking again at the national insurance tax rises. That has hit all small businesses but has also hit farmers particularly heavy, and they're struggling to employ people, they're struggling to keep them in employment, and we need that multi-annual funding for farms. That allows them to plan, that allows them to have look at biodiversity on their farms. They're all farmers that I meet are really keen to do that, but they need that little bit of help to get them there. Most farms are as biodiverse as they can possibly get, but they need some extra funding for that. If we want them to operate like that, we need to provide money to them, and cutting the budgets is not the way to do it, because that makes people cut corners and that doesn't make it good for the environment.
Thank you. And then Ariane, for the last one on this.
Thanks very much. I don't know how many of you caught the UK government's Joint Security Committee report that came out at the end of January about global biodiversity collapse. I see nodding heads. And I think that's like massive alarm bells ringing in the room for me and across the country. It really should be. So how do we change the subsidy program? We need to change the subsidy program so that it supports farmers to farm, nature-friendly farming. We just in the last session, we just legislated for regenerative and sustainable agriculture. So now we actually need to put the measures in place that allow that to happen. Some of those things, Scottish Greens, what we want to see is the bulk of the agricultural budget, so £500 million, would go to what we're calling a transition insurance fund. So that would be saying to farmers, you can make this change safely towards regenerative and sustainable, nature-friendly farming, because we need to give them that insurance that as they take that step, they know that they've got that safety net to try it, because there's so many different forms of land here in Scotland, and we've heard about LFA and so on and so forth. We're going into a somewhat of an experimental space, and we need to absolutely give farmers that certainty. I think that some of the resistance that I've certainly come across in the last 5 years is because of that fear of what happens if we make these changes. We've got systems in place that we know kind of work, but are kind of very narrow margins. So how do we actually support them to boldly do that? So some of the other things that I've been doing in terms of helping, well, one of the things I want to point out is I think that we've got two systems and we need to acknowledge it. We've got the system that is about growth economy and for export, and we're subsidizing that. But we also, and I think as part of a good food nation, we need to be recognizing that we need to be supporting farmers to feed people locally, to create that local resilience that we desperately need in the face of what we're hearing with this biodiversity collapse. So how are we feeding people locally? And one of the things I want to see is that we have an equivalent support scheme for market gardeners, so otherwise known as people who grow fruit and veg. We've got the beef suckler scheme, we've got the support scheme for sheep. Why don't we have a support scheme for people who grow fruit and veg? One of the things I managed to get through in the ARC Act was, it's there on the books and we need to make it happen, is that people who are working on land that's less than 3 hectares could actually receive support. So that's there, we need to activate it. Another thing that I want to see is that we actually pay farmers based on activity-based work. But the support scheme, I think we can bring in a pilot. That's one of the things I've been pushing the government to do. Bring in a pilot for the market gardeners, look at that. What's the appropriate type of support for them? What would work? And then the other piece is that, given that we've legislated for agricultural, regenerative and sustainable agriculture, we need a training system. We need to prioritize that. That's in Tier 4, and it's kind of that system that those of you, some of it's jargon, but some of you know. So there's funding that's there for CPD, continual professional development, but there's no funding to help new entrants. There's no funding to really support people to move to regenerative agriculture. So I want to see a 10-year pipeline that brings people into the system from high school, apprentice, and existing farmers, and help them transition, and that it's farmer-led and clusters around Scotland. So the farmers that have been boldly going into regenerative agriculture already, nature-friendly farming already, we need to reward them, support them, and they are the trainers for the other farmers. Peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. We know it absolutely works.
Thank you so much, Ariane. I think we need to put this back out. Oh, no. Have we still got one more to go on this? No. Okay. So I think I'm going to I think the lady in the black and white kind of check thing. Yes. Jumper.
Okay, thank you very much. In the light of the rising cost of nitrogen fertilizers and the need to reach net zero, would you support an expansion of organic agriculture in Scotland?
So, yeah, in the light of the rising cost of fertilizers, would you support, what was it, an organic? Expansion of organics in Scotland. So, yes, okay, fire ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Vicky. I mean, absolutely yes. I mean, I think that would be part of, a whole bigger set of issues that we need to grapple with here. But absolutely, why wouldn't we have more organic food production, preferably at as localized a scale as possible, when using, involving community groups and local supply chains, and a number of us have alluded to ideas and good practice around that already. We just need more of it. I think, it's good that you use the illustration of the rising fertilizer prices. I mean, undoubtedly, I know I won't be the only one who's heard that in the last few weeks from the farming community that in my constituency. And, why is that? It's because here we are again in yet another major kind of global shock, oil-based, fossil fuel-based, which is causing extraordinary and will continue to cause extraordinarily negative impact across the globe. And I want at this point, I think, to draw in a recent report from the UK government's Climate Change Committee. I suspect many of you in the room may have read it already. It was only a few weeks ago. Their most recent analysis tells us that the cost of reaching net zero by 2050 is less than the cost of another one of these single, gigantic fossil fuel price shocks. So take that in, folks, because we're talking about Ukraine, we're now talking about Iran, there'll be another one along in a minute, probably. And, we've got to get off this dependency. It's, yes, we need just transition, but we have to really fundamentally change the way that we live, work, grow, and so forth, and absolutely organics be a key part of that. But to dismiss net zero as nonsense or madness or what have you is, and I'm not picking on you particularly, Stephen, because you're just parroting the Farage lines, it's grossly insulting to humanity, frankly, that needs better than that from our politicians. We're grappling with some deep, serious issues here. Nobody has all of the answers, but we need to find a better way than this kind of extraordinary polarizing around something which the science tells us we have to address.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Ray had said there. I think there's two things. One, we're in a climate emergency, but we're also in a biodiversity emergency, and we have to make sure that the two are linked. We can't forget that, so I think that's an incredibly important part. I think I mentioned in the opening statement around about the Tier 3 and listening to farmers about agricultural support, about doubling organic production. And I think one of the challenges we have as well is if we're talking about organics, people I think that's going to damage the farms. I think there's a real business opportunity and growth as well, and I see that in East Lothian already, where there's organic suppliers in terms of looking at that. And it's a food security issue in terms of that. Ray mentioned about Ukraine. We see what's happening in terms of what's happening in the Middle East at the moment as well. That then feeds through to what we're talking about, food inflation. Food inflation is predicted to rise to around about 10, 11, 12% in the next year or so. So that impacts, and we heard the question from Cara talking around about the cost of food and the impact it has. That feeds all the way through. So I think for a number of reasons for tackling the climate emergency, tackling the biodiversity emergency, food security, we should be trying to maximise organic production as best as we possibly can.
Thank you.
I suppose I have to respond to net zero, don't I? Unfortunately, the last two panellists are just way off beam. I'm not just parroting the reform mantra, although we do not believe in net zero. But let's suppose if carbon dioxide really is as bad as everybody says it is. Let's say it is, right? Today, we have an average temperature of the Earth of 15 degrees centigrade and 425 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Just over 4%, 0.04% is carbon dioxide, right? A very, very small trace gas. If that is the case, that's the real control knob for temperature, I'd like the rest of the panel to explain what happened during the Ordovician Ice Age 450 million years ago. At that point, the average temperature of the Earth was only 12 degrees, i.e. 3 degrees colder than today, and yet we had 4,400 parts per million. Can they explain that? Can they? I suspect they can't. In fact, I suspect they probably never heard of it. And what about the Younger Dryas? We hear so much today about 1 degree per century has been really fast in terms of climate change. Yet you go to NOAA's website, the American National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, you go to their website on Younger Dryas, it clearly states there that at the end of the Younger Dryas, the temperature in Greenland rose by 10 degrees in a single decade. That's 100 times faster than what we are seeing today. What is the climate crisis today? And I doubt any of the panellists can answer that, but we'll give them the opportunity.
Thanks, Stephen. I don't know if we do need the full opportunity to go into all the way into the science of climate crisis.
Climate change is essential because we don't actually understand what they're talking about.
Okay, well, if we can just pull it round to answering the question, which was about fertilizer, given the and organics, yes.
The easy answer to the question is yes. Our farmers are struggling with costs. We've talked about that. Some of us talked about it. We need to find another way. I would like to see it being piloted a lot more so that we can actually see the impact. And then also to those farmers who might not be as discerning as that, to show that it does make a difference. And there's probably a cost benefit to it as well on their costs. So I'd like to see more of that, but the answer is yes. I'm not going to answer the other question because I wasn't around in the Ice Age, and I don't think any of the other panellists were either.
Thanks very much for that question. So organics is at the heart of the Scottish Greens. In the first session, our solo green MSP tried to bring in organics legislation at that point. And I think, as we know, in the last session, there was a commitment and a move towards at least doubling. So we had, I think, by session 4, so 6 or 7 years ago, we had the percentage of Scottish farmland was 1.8, and we've gone for 3.5. In Europe, it's much higher. I think it's 25 that they're going for. So we're kind of going slowly. But I think some of the issues that we need to really, one thing is it takes time to put the land to rest and allow it to move over to organic status. But also we need to look at the supply chains. Are they there? Because I think that's one of the things that farmers are very concerned about, is if they move to organics, is the supply chain there that's going to actually take the product? And then the other thing that I think at the heart of organics is actually soil. And we absolutely need the infrastructure to support farmers to really understand their soils. So there is some good work already that the Scottish Government brought forward through the whole farm plan on the national, what's called the National Test Programme, which just seems so opaque, but it's about testing your soil. And it was a surprise to me that there actually were farmers that weren't testing their soil. But I think that's a really important habit to get into, is testing the soil. And what I've learned is actually there's a kind of level of sophistication on soil, having met a fantastic farmer who does regenerative farming in the Borders, Matt Griffin, where he's got test plots where he's trying all kinds of inputs, natural, whatever, different things, seaweed, this and that, and testing it. And he's been sending his results to the States to be tested. And it made me think, oh, do we need better infrastructure for soil testing at a deeper, more complex layer as farmers start to really pick this really important part of managing their soils up and understanding what it really means to look after the soil.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I was going to do a short ode to soil myself, but my green colleague did a fantastic job. I will say I'm a fan of science. I understand science. I've taught science. The science-informed answer to your question is that moving towards organics is it's no longer a choice, it's a necessity. We need to replenish our soils. And the way we do that is, as I've discussed, moving power out of Holyrood, empowering local people who know their soil, who know their land, who know their supply chains, and empowering them to get the job done. The science backs it. It's also, as you've alluded, a hugely important aspect of our national sovereignty. Everything that we've been working towards, I'm sure in this room, all of the measures we've been taking to address the climate crisis are hugely informing how we deal with our geopolitical context. It was always that important, but it's empowering to see that everyone is able to join the dots now, between the science, between the climate crisis, and between the geopolitical reality that we're in. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Eleanor. I think we've come to the end of that question, and I'm going back to Slido. Actually, hang on a second with the hands up there. I'll come back to you. So this is a much more sector-specific question. Last year saw continued high fish mortality on Scottish salmon farms, yet not one unannounced inspection was conducted at the worst performing sites. Will you seek stronger regulation and implement unannounced and independent inspections? And it's Paul first, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just on that, in East Lothian, we don't have any salmon farms, as you can appreciate. In terms of that, I think that's an incredibly important issue. I know that's something that we've all certainly the MSPs have been contacted about. I think it does require tighter regulation, without a doubt. I think we've seen various documentaries and various programmes in Scotland, not just in Scotland, in terms of that as well, around about how that's impacted. In terms of that, we can have our views on salmon fishing, and I think that, but for me, it certainly needs to be much tighter regulated. And unannounced visits is something I think that the Scottish Government is looking at and should be looking at as we go forward into the next Parliament. That is certainly something I would support.
Thank you, Paul.
I think we need to have our salmon fishing farms up to standard. There's no question about that. We can't have substandard food going out, and that would be bad for Scotland, bad for the farmers, bad for all us. So I agree, we need to make sure that things are in place to ensure that we have proper quality controls for the fish.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, pass the parcel again. There you go.
Yes, I think we need more regulation, and we need on-the-spot inspections. That is a damage to the salmon community and the salmon farming industry, and it should be nipped in the bud as quickly as you possibly can. So I would hope there would be regulation in the next session of Parliament. It's important that we have high standards, because all our food produce is respected around the world, and if it slips in any shape or form, someone else will come in and take that market away from us, and that shouldn't be allowed. So much more on-spot inspections. We do it in our schools and our care homes. Why would we not do it to our fish?
Thank you, Ariane.
Yeah, this is a topic very close to my heart. So I've been calling for a pause on the expansion of existing farms and licensing of new farms. And that is because there are so many problems, high levels of mortality, problems with high levels of sea lice, the use of chemicals. So many aspects of the industry is problematic. And another thing that I have a big concern about is the industry says, we employ people in coastal communities, but we have seen a lot of the mortalities are connected to the problem with algal blooms that are coming about because of warm seas and the arrival of micro jellyfish. The seas are warming. That's because of climate change. And so it could be that the industry collapses very suddenly overnight, and then what happens to our coastal communities? So we need to build in more resilience. So absolutely, more unannounced checks is a really important part of really understanding, is this industry fit for purpose in terms of producing food? And I think another thing I would add is the industry talks about being an important producer of a high level of protein for the world, global protein. But then you have to question, well, if they're feeding a carnivorous fish with anchovies, another form of protein that are farmed in Chile, that are brought here. I'm not sure if it's the most sustainable form of food production. And again, I'd be very concerned that we are putting we're putting everything into this sector to employ people in our coastal communities on the West Coast, in Shetland, in Orkney, when we could actually be looking at other forms of employment and actually looking at better support and regulation of our wild fish sector, and actually seeing that's the way to go. But yeah, so absolutely, we need to check this industry fully and much more spontaneously.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So my urban constituency of Edinburgh North has, it has the historic port of Granton and Newhaven. It doesn't extensively fish anymore. Actually, Granton Harbour provides a great lesson on this in terms of the depletion to extinction of the native oyster population there. Some of you folks will be aware of Restoration Forth and the work that they've done. And yeah, it's a brilliant example of exactly what we're talking about. If we don't respect the way things live in our blue environment, then we cannot rely on them as important protein sources, as well as incredibly important enhancing species. We're going to develop a marine plan at Scottish Labour, and that will include clarity for fisheries. We're really interested in looking at innovative ways of supporting our coastal communities, our fisheries, our fishing industry. So we'll be looking into all of that through our marine plan.
Thank you. We're very close to something almost like consensus breaking out here, almost, nearly.
I was thinking that.
I think the key point in the question was around, unannounced inspections, and that's clearly critical in order to generate and, restore and then generate confidence in that industry. And confidence is critical because when we know that all these issues are taking place, and Ariane made the point very eloquently about the connection with algal blooms and the climate impact there. We're proud to have. Scottish food and drink has a high quality reputation. It's a key, part of the brand, and we're in serious danger of diminishing that if we don't have a more grown-up approach to regulation and transparency in that industry in order to generate confidence in the product and restore that high-quality reputation that the Scottish food and drink does deserve.
Thanks very much, Ray. That's everyone done. Interesting, almost consensus, as you say, on something that I've actually covered a lot myself. So there's a lot of hands up. This is going to be tricky. Can I have sort of the man who's the third along just there? If you could introduce yourself and say where you're from, that'd be great.
Hello, my name's Abdullah and I'm based in Livingston. So my question is that the Scottish Government cites research online that shows that the most effective way to reduce our food emissions is to adopt a plant-based diet, reducing emissions by 75% according to the University of Oxford. So my question to you is, would you support policies that encourage farmers and help communities to make a just transition towards a plant-based food system? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, would you support policies to make a just transition towards a plant-based food systems? And I have to say, I can see on Slido, a similar question is one of the most popular questions. So who is next? It's Stephen, yes.
Hi, Abdullah. Your question is based on the premise that the climate crisis is real. We just had a discussion where none of the panellists could argue against my points that it's not real. So as far as Reform are concerned, there is no need to move to a plant-based way of eating.
Okay, we have it back along to Julie.
I think that I come from the world of that you should have a mixed diet. I think that's really important. I think that's really important for our farming community. Would I want to see us go 100% to a plant-based diet? No, I don't. Because I think that would have consequences for our economy, and particularly for that Scottish food brand that we export all over the world. Would I like people to be more balanced in their diets? Yes, I definitely would. And I think there was an idea a couple of years ago where you had 1 or 2 days a week and you didn't eat any protein whatsoever, and it was basically plant-based. Do I support that? Yes, I do. But I don't think we should go the full hog yet, and that might happen in the future, all the way to legislation or policy around a plant-based diet. I think that would be difficult to implement in Scotland, and I would like to see the balance that exists at the moment continue.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for that question around plant-based food system. I think we definitely need to move in that direction, and it's something I've been working on in the last 5 years. So I mentioned the work I've been doing to support people who grow fruit and veg. We absolutely need that to happen. We need to see, I've seen far too many people that have started small market gardens, setting it up. The people want to buy local fruit and veg. They want to have more plants in their diet, more locally grown. And I've seen too many of those market gardeners start up, work really, really hard, be dependent potentially on volunteer support as well, and then they collapse. And I see this also in the crofting world. So I want to see the government actually bring in a support system for market gardens. The other thing that I was working on just before the end of that session, the last session, was to change the subsidy system so that the less favored areas are not tied to animal-based protein, but that we could actually have stock-free farming. There are plenty of people, I know one crofter who has many, many hectares of land, who has said because they are tied into the system of having to have animals, particularly sheep, on their land, and they don't want that. They want to move to a nut-based project. They want to grow hazels, and they're saying that they're tied into a system where they're being funded to have animals on their land where they find that soul destroying. So I do think there needs to be a mix in Scotland. That I understand that, but I think it needs to be a balance. Something else that I've been working on is supporting the work that's being done across Scotland on bringing in hemp. So Scotland, we used to grow a form of protein, hemp. And there's some fantastic work being done by the Rowett Institute and a number of farmers across Scotland. And I think that could be a really important thing. But so we need to get away from the idea that protein is just animal-based. You can get plenty of good plant-based protein, and we can grow that here in Scotland. So let's support farmers to do that.
Thanks, Ariane.
Thank you. What an interesting question. To refer back to my point earlier about addressing food poverty head-on, I'm really excited about the hubs that will be mirroring the Sure Start centres. What's fascinating in relation to your question is back in the day when we started with the Sure Start centres, I don't believe that plant-based diets weren't as well known. They weren't receiving the attention from policymakers that they are now. So I'd be really interested to see how discussions about plant-based options or plant-based protein might inform the nutritional support that, for example, midwives or health visitors that will be based in those hubs might be having with families, and vice versa, that the families may be sharing their own plant-based practices with the professionals, which would be wonderful. We are committed to empowering farmers and local people. They know what will work in their land, and we have to support them to deliver that. To hark again back to my wonderful constituency, just because we've got a really strong example in Granton Community Gardeners, it's fascinating to see. I know you're talking about market gardeners, I'd talk about community gardeners. They're making incredible progress in terms of empowering local people to feed themselves, to feed their families with stuff that they've grown locally, and to flag as well, the North Edinburgh Community Festival actually has beans as its food theme this year. So I'm really proud of what we're achieving in urban growing and urban farming in terms of plant-based options. The way that we support that isn't by directly subsidising that plant-based practice, but again, it's by pushing power out of Holyrood into communities who know best, who know what will grow here in Edinburgh, what grows, and beans grow very well. So that's my ode to beans.
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor. This is fun. I now feel an obligation to name check all the really great groups in my constituency as well. I suspect some of them may be in the room. I don't know. Fabulous people like Abundant Borders, who do brilliant work. And I live in the wee town of Duns in Berwickshire, and we have a fabulous community garden there. And there's loads of them dotted across the borders. I mean, it's all happening in the borders. It really is. Trust me, it really is. I've got another great example to give you later on. But back to the question, I'm not in favour of prescription on a plant-based diet. I'm very much in the space of finding balance here, encouraging people to make informed choices, and clearly more of a move in that direction would be helpful, and we should encourage it, but not force it. You have to bring people with you, and we've got a job to do, haven't we, to kind of build the knowledge, build the understanding, and that includes understanding clearly why it's important to have that better balance in the future because of the climate. But I'm of a generation that is old enough to remember when good meat was a luxury. A Sunday dinner, a chicken or a piece of beef was a big deal in our house, and we've moved so far away from that in the way that the big industry, big agri-industry and food producers have, flooded the world with cheap meat, much of which is just not very good for you. And so a move back to quality, again, it connects to the question about organics, and kind of local production. Good meat close to home is still a joy, I think, and we certainly have plenty of it in the borders. Do come and visit. But I'm not in favour of kind of strict rules on this. Education, promotion, intelligent sharing of knowledge to help people make informed choices is where I would be.
Thanks, Abdul. I think it's a really good question, and I think for a number of reasons. One, I think a plant-based diet is incredibly important. One, for nutrition, because we need a balanced nutritional diet in terms of that. I don't think we have that at the moment, so I think that there's evidence behind that. I think one of the other key things as well, and it's coming back to the local food strategy, and the local food strategy, that was in 2024 that came out. And one of the key things, the first pillar in that is connecting people with local food. We all know the importance of local food, but the wider community doesn't. So I think it's a role for all of us, and there are lots of good examples around about that. So how do we make sure that people actually are aware of the food they're eating and where it comes from? And I'm going to take the advantage of this as well. Everybody else has mentioned about it. We have a community farm in Tinningham, which is fantastic. And we also have, there's a community-owned business called the Crunchy Carrot in Dunbar, which has been community-owned for a number of years, which produces food and uses local food producers. So I would be in favour of producing, increasing plant-based food. But I think there's a role for all of us in this room tonight around about how do we make sure that people in their own communities are aware of where the food actually comes from, and how we can support community groups, such as I said, that's been mentioned by all of us here in terms of that. But a really important point. But nutritionally, it's incredibly important that we increase the ability to produce plant-based food.
Thanks so much, Paul. Great question. As I say, it was the most popular, a very similar question, the most popular on Slido. But I'm going to go to another popular question on Slido.
We've lost track of his question.
Oh, have I? Yes. I thought maybe I'd stopped before we were meant to then. Okay, so this question is, how might a more diversified pattern of land ownership, less large estates and less corporate ownership, contribute to a more vibrant, diverse and secure food system? Fire away, Julie. Yes.
I think that we probably need to look at some change in that sphere. I think we do have some very large estates that own a lot of land, and for me, this is slightly digressing off the subject, but when we get into renewable and energy generation, we are seeing a problem with that, with large landowners being targeted particularly to build pylons or solar farms. And I think that is really difficult for communities to understand. So I would like to see a bit of balance in that sphere, because we do need more biodiversity. That's not to say that some of those very large landowners, which are in the, most of them are in the borders and in the north, do encourage that on their land, and I've seen that firsthand, and some of it is really impressive. Do we need a bit more balance? Probably. I think in most things we need a bit more balance.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. more diversified ownership, leading to more vibrant, diverse food system. Yeah, so I think one of the things that we want to do in the next session, we tried to do it in the last session, would be if a land reform bill comes forward, we'd like to see that capping of 500 hectares in terms of ownership. And the reason we want to, and I mean, there are some good bits in the previous bit of land reform legislation around when land transfers hands, there'll be a lotting of land, and that will give us a bit of an opportunity to break up some of these bigger parcels. So why does more diverse ownership? I think about this a lot, actually. If we go back historically to the clearances, before the clearances, you had lots of people living in the straths and the glens, and bring it forward to today with our understanding of soil and things like that, more people on the land interacting with the land in different ways, using their creativity, innovation, more people engaging with nature and looking at how it works, how nature works, how growing food, how experimenting with hemp, with the hazel growing, all of these different things that we need to bring in. The thing with our land ownership system right now is that it's very extractive. It's putting a lot of sheep on, or a lot of cattle on, or it's like, what can we extract from the land? And I think the direction of travel with certainly younger people I meet, they want to work with nature. They want to be on smaller parcels of land, working with nature, working with their neighbors, and having that kind of collaborative space. So I think it's not just about a diversified food system, it's also about a resilient food system. If we have more smaller scale producers working together with local food hubs, sorting out the abattoir issue, then we actually start to build in that resilience, which comes back to the problem that we're facing with biodiversity collapse. And the other piece around more people, smaller scale, is that, again, those people that I'm talking to really, really want to pull in the climate and the biodiversity piece. So that's something that I absolutely want to see is many more people on the land. But we've got a pathway to get there because so many of us have been completely disconnected from the land because of the historic pattern of land ownership. So there's a lot. So the hutting measure that I got into the Land Reform Act means more people could actually set up huts. If you need a hut, talk to the forestry land folks, because now they're going to be required to allow people to have a hut on public land. So that's a step of how do you start to fall back in love with land and start to think about growing food and connecting with your community and nature.
Thank you. In terms of our policy on farming, we are focused on growth. That growth is supportive of farmers and their connection with the land. It's green growth. It's growth that acknowledges the depletion of our nature and our land, and that works to address that. But it is about growth. In terms of land reform, it will be interesting to see what happens in the next Parliament. Our policy doesn't explicitly address it. However, it's worth noting that land reform is absolutely in our DNA as Scottish Labour. Land reform and boosting community ownership was one of the first key reforms that a Labour-led Scottish Government implemented. So we have it in our DNA, and it'd be interesting to see it play out.
Thank you. Really good question. I mean, I see at least two different dimensions to this. There's an urban-rural divide on this question, I would say. I mean, there are plenty of there's plenty of land in all of our towns and cities that is underutilized, or it's held by developers, or it's it's in a state where it needs repair, whether it's contaminated or there are other issues. And I do think there should be opportunities there to create more space for urban farming, very much along the lines we've often all been talking about, and nearly all of us talking about tonight, in terms of community ownership and very localized access to the ability to grow food. So that's certainly an area to consider more strongly. I think there are plenty of opportunities to do more in that area. In terms of the huge rural landowners, this is such a deep and thorny issue in Scotland. I'd like to think it was possible, given all the challenges that we face in society, to have more of our big landowners, see the value in sharing and working with their communities, even modestly, to allow access and different models of ownership or ability to access land for local food production. And that probably sounds like a typically Liberal Democrat sort of middle of the road kind of answer, but I think the sort of intense land reform that perhaps some would like to do, I think is not viable within the lifetime of the next Scottish Parliament. So let's look to see what we can do in the relative short term to try to make a difference. That's where I am.
Thank you. I think it's a really good question. I think I was part of the Parliament that passed the last on Land Reform Act. I think it was a good start, but I think we need to go a little bit further, and I think there's evidence. I think a lot of MSPs kind of seen that as well, so I think that will come up again, I think, in the next Parliament. Obviously, we'll see what's delivered there, but I think that will come up. One of the key issues, and I don't think it's been talked about so far, is actually taxation on land, and I think, again, we need to be progressive in terms of the taxation. In terms of that, we all know the figures that are out there and the number of land that's owned in Scotland by a small amount of landowners. And there's obviously then we're talking about farms and so on as well. But if we're talking about taxation, I think that's an important part to talk about. I think the Crofton Bill kind of recognised the importance of Crofton and probably in another parts of Scotland. But I've heard and we've been involved in discussions about Lowland Crofton. Could that happen possibly in East Lothian in the borders we've heard about it? But I think there's an opportunity to look at that and how can we expand on Lowland Crofting. I think I talked about the community farm in Tinningham before. I know the issue they had in trying to identify land with farmers at that particular time. So I think we need to do more to try and increase the usage and the reach of community farms. So again, I would be looking at how we can do that. And I think we've all touched on it as well, as around about local food producers. I talked about the Crunchy Carrot, for example, and they work with local farmers. But I think there's an opportunity to grow in terms of how we look and work with tenant farmers, for example. How can we make it easier for tenant farmers as well in terms of that? That's really difficult when they engage with farmers just now. But we need to do more in terms of that about local food production also.
Thank you.
It's an interesting question, but the question really should be, what is it we're doing with the land rather than who owns the land? I've got farmer friends that both own land and rent land, and between the two of them, they're able to work out exactly how they get their farming done. So it's not necessarily about who owns the land, but what can we do with the land? As mentioned earlier, 86% of Scottish land is what they call less favoured areas. It's not so good for crop production, and that's why we get a lot of animal farming on that land. So it's not a question really about who owns the land necessarily, about what we use the land for and how we use the land. And if there are physical limitations to the soil or whatever, then we need to take that into account as well. So I'm slightly less worried about who owns the farms and the land, as opposed to how the farms and lands is actually used for producing food, etc.
Thank you. So we've done them all this time. Yes. Is that right? Yes. Okay, so I think I might take something from this side. I thought I saw the woman with the... Anyway, the green top. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, it's convenient that was mentioned then. So I'm Donna Smith. I'm from the Scottish Crofting Federation, so I'm based in the Highlands. My question was actually sort of a counter to the plant-based question earlier, and that's about how would your parties better support local abattoir provision so that we can actually do some of that local food production, reduce food miles, and allow people in small rural communities to be providing food to their local community right on the doorstep.
Great. So, Ariane, how would you support local abattoirs? Yes.
Thanks for that question, Donna. So mobile abattoirs is something that's being looked into. So we absolutely need to do that. I think one of the challenges is getting people who to actually want to work in abattoirs. That is an issue. Finding the people, and that's been a challenge that has arisen really since we left the EU, because we had a lot of people coming from Eastern Europe working in that sector. But another thing that's been interesting to me is meeting Jane Cooper, who is based in Orkney, and she was a knitter, and she got into raising a particular type of sheep, a rare breed from Orkney. I cannot remember what it's called at the moment. And I went to meet her. They're the sheep with the big curly horns. And because she got into the wool, she then therefore realized, okay, I need to now get into the whole thing of processing the meat and the challenge of the abattoirs. So what they came up with is, I think, a really great system. So they don't call it a mobile abattoir, I think they call it a movable abattoir. And there are some issues there that I'm being a bit vague on at the moment, that where we need to be more supportive in that space, so that smaller community collectives can get around the way in which they're going to be processing the animals. And I think the other thing that we need to look at is, how do we keep some of that meat that's produced, say, in the Western Isles, in the Western Isles, or on the islands. I know there's a beef farmer who does regenerative agriculture on an island, but he has to send the animals off farm to an abattoir, off island to an abattoir. So how do we do much more small scale? I think that's something that we need to be looking at. What do we do in terms of regulations in that space?
Thank you for that fascinating question. I'm so far away from crafting and the abattoir world, but I'm excited to hear about it. And again, it makes my point. Sitting in Holyrood, I need you and your local knowledge to be able to make decisions about this. You can make decisions about resourcing this, about where it should happen, how it should happen. So again, we have to push the power out of Holyrood, and my job, Scottish Labour's empowering position, would be to push it towards you and your community and say, look, you've identified this need, and you are best placed to know how to deliver it and to make the decisions on funding that are related to that. So yeah, over to you, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. I'm probably in a quite similar position. That was an extraordinarily niche but really important question, and I think the principle I think has to be that the regulators who would have to kind of oversee small scale abattoir even of the mobile kind that Ariane describes, which it seems eminently sensible to me. There needs to be appropriate level of regulation. It needs the regulators to not be heavy-handed, but to kind of work with the operators, producers, and the folk who know what they're doing on the ground to, reach a sensible way to empower and encourage those facilities to be part of our food supply chain. It just seems such an obviously practically sensible thing that we ought to be able to get right quite easily. But I can see from the expression on your face that it probably isn't, but the point is it should be, and so if that requires direction by government upon the regulators to take that type of approach, then we must do it.
Thank you, Donna. That was a really good question, and I actually had this issue from a constituent, a pig farmer in East Lothian, who literally had to send their pigs 300 or 400 miles down the road. And a market that was already tight margins, that then really added costs to that in terms of it. I think there's an approach. I think we need to look at a regional approach in terms of this. And Ariane talked about a co-op model. I think that needs to be looked at. Whatever it's co-op or collaborative model in terms of farmers that are already there, I think that needs to be looked at. Government needs to support it. I raised it with the Cabinet Secretary at that particular time. I know that was something that the government was looking at. But I think it's certainly an issue because it does add first and foremost, one, to the welfare of the animals that are travelling that period of time, but two, in terms of the margins that farmers, and particularly in the pig farming sector, it didn't make it viable. It didn't make it viable. So I think government needs to support some kind of regionalised model in terms of that. And it's even more important when it comes to the islands and whatever. But it's an issue I know in the southeast of Scotland as well, for where we had that. But government needs to support it. And it needs further discussion in terms of that. But it's a really important issue that I had raised directly with a constituent in that regard.
Yeah, very important question, and I've had similar instances from farmers in the Falkirk area. The abattoir situation is not as good as it used to be. It's actually part of the Reform Manifesto to actually create apprenticeships to get people back into abattoirs to make sure that they can be properly staffed, so we can have local abattoirs so it doesn't cost farmers fortune sending their livestock hundreds of miles away to meet their end, as it were. So yeah, I agree very much. We need that. and it's something that we should be looking forward to, and it's part of our manifesto that we will do, get more people into the abattoir industry.
Thank you. So Julie's the last one, I think, on this, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. It is a really important question. As I said, I live in the borders and we struggle there. And it's also not good for the quality of the meat or produce that we're producing, because the more they travel, it makes it firmer. It's not just as nice as it should be. It should be a regionalised abattoir scheme. And I completely agree that our colleges need to offer those kind of courses, so we're joined up. So you set the abattoirs up regionally or mobile. I think that would work very well. But we also have the skills in our workforce that can able to do the jobs, because there's no point setting up a workplace and there's nobody to do the jobs, then it would fall down. So it needs to be a full circle of how we tackle the problem. It needs government to take a hand and to stand up for those that are producing meat across Scotland.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks so much for that great but a little bit niche question. We have something that's not so niche next. It's on Slido. Will you ensure there is commitment to fund local authorities and health boards to develop and implement their local Good Food Nation plans? And that's Eleanor, yeah.
Thank you for that. Another opportunity to hark on about pushing power into local authorities, into health boards, and it's absolutely key to the Scottish Labour plan on so many aspects of our economy and society, to address local authority funding, to break the dependency on one-year cycles, to allow local authorities and charities to plan and to deliver without the pressure of one-year cycles. So absolutely, it's key to our commitment on so many aspects of policy, including delivery of the local Good Food Nation plans, to empower local authorities and local health boards who know how to get the job done to get the job done.
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. I mean, we're in a situation where we have, a decent piece of legislation which has taken some time to come through in terms of the Good Food Nation Act. We have a Food Commission which is set up or in process of setting up, and whilst it's a piece of framework legislation, of course the detail now in terms of delivery and implementation is what's really important. And so, absolutely. The requirement for local authorities and health boards to work together, knit together, to be drivers of local plans is really important. Undoubtedly, there will be areas where councils are lacking people to do the work. We all know that our local authorities they're not far short of being hollowed out in terms of resources that are available to them, and that needs to be addressed, because and that's more broadly. It's not just a question of local food plans. That's more broadly across the nation. We need to have a reset of the relationship between the central government in Holyrood and our local authorities, and much more more resource, more support is needed for councils to do what they always have been able to do best, and be truly representative of their localities, understand the needs of their area, their region, and work closely and tightly with all the key stakeholders to deliver the sort of local food production, local supply chain support that mainly we've been talking about on and off all evening. So it's not straightforward. This is now a big challenge for the next government, and obviously local authority elections next year, and councils and health boards to get engaged. It's not straightforward. It's not easy. We know that there are deep resource challenges, but the prize is too great for this to just become another one of those areas where we have a well-intentioned policy framework that fails on delivery because of lack of resource. We can't allow that to happen.
Thank you. I think the answer is yes. I think the Good Food Nation plan I talked about came forward in December. I think one of the key things then I talked about was a delivery plan, and there needs to be that commitment to the funding, and Scottish Government gave that. I think one of the key things for me as well is how do we then tie that into local food strategy, because it needs to be something that needs to be bedded in. I talked about connecting people with local food. I think is really important, and I think one of the key things we should talk about the next couple of pillars, it's connecting Scottish producers with buyers. Now, I was instrumental and played a part in setting up, there was a business improvement district, East Lothian Food and Drink, which was the first sector-based business improvement district, so that's working with the food and drink producers in East Lothian. I think that was incredibly important. I think there's an opportunity to do that more in terms of that as well. I think the key thing then is how do we harness public sector procurement. That's almost the third pillar of the local food strategy, but I think is incredibly important. So I think funding is one part of it. Actually implementing and embedding in the local food strategies are incredibly important. When you see the challenges from the NHS, for example, or the schools, I see the opportunities in East Lothian. As I said, we're importing, we're getting food coming into East Lothian 200 or 300 miles away. We're talking about the basket in Scotland, East Lothian. East Lothian could be self-sufficient in that, so we need to make sure that happens. So embedding the local food strategy, I think, is part of that as well as the funding commitment. So we need to make sure that the two are committed to going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. It's also one where I think we're almost about breaking out into agreement. Certainly, as Paul mentioned, the public procurement approach, we should be putting in things like social value clauses to make sure that local food can be used locally when it comes to school meal provision and hospital meal provision, etc. So there are things we could do, and I think that should be the way forward.
Thank you.
It needs to be well funded. We have lots of good examples in local authorities, and I'm a local authority councillor, where we work together with the NHS, particularly on place plans and on children and young people plans. So the mechanism, I believe, is there, but it needs to be funded. We cannot have local authorities doing more or diversifying and not be funded and have the backup to do it. There's lots of good people across the NHS and in local authorities to do the work, but they need to have funding. It can't be an add-on, and this is where delivery will fail. If it's an add-on to everything else they are doing, then it will fall flat on its face. I don't think any of us want to see that, and it's important that that is recognised quickly at government, because we've seen that on local place plans. It's taken a very long time to work through the system. I don't think there is the same amount of time on food plans and strategies.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's absolutely essential that local authorities and health boards are funded adequately. And I think when we were reviewing the national plan in the Parliament last session, I asked for my committee. I was convening the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, and I said, we need to do a session on this. We didn't have a lot of time in our work programme, but I insisted that we do that we hear from local authorities and others that would be involved in these plans to see what the impacts were going to be on them. And that was the number one thing, was multi-year funding and adequate funding. And I think it can't be piecemeal. For example, there's a councillor in Highland Council who has been waiting for the Good Food Plan to happen and has actually secured money for an officer to start the work on the plan. But that shouldn't be the way it is. It shouldn't be from one budget to another, and it shouldn't be an individual councillor having to do it. It needs to be something that's absolutely embedded. And along with that, we need to make sure that there's adequate funding for the Food Commission, because the Food Commission, the point of the Food Commission, in my mind, in discussion with the Cabinet Secretary, was that the Commission, in large part, was there to support local authorities who don't have enough funding, cash-strapped local authorities, actually have somebody that's helping them think well and in the round about their plans. So we absolutely need to see the Commission supported. We also need to, the plans are one thing, but as has been said, how do we make it work? So we absolutely need to see a move towards local public procurement contracts. And I think something that the Scottish Greens want to see is that we change the law to allow councils to prioritise local content and worker-owned firms in terms of procurement. So we start to actually get that community wealth building piece that these good food plans can actually bring about.
Great, thank you. I think we're back to the audience, yes. So just taking a look around, maybe someone from the back. How about the man just there who's in the middle of that row there? Yeah.
Thanks very much. My name's Andrew Stark from the Eating Better Alliance. Obviously, this is the food debate, but we know that there's other aspects of society that have a big impact on people's ability to have healthy and sustainable diets. So I guess I'd be really interested in, and there's been a lot of consensus, which is wonderful, and a lot of agreement, but I'm really interested in like specific policy differences between each parties. What are the different policy proposals that your party are going to introduce in the new parliament that would have a knock-on impact on people's ability to access food? That could be, for example, deregulated buses or the cost of rent for a lot of people in Scotland. So I'm very interested in those kind of knock-on effects within our food system that are very related to the topics that we've discussed tonight.
Okay, so yes, a little bit straying off food, but what policies are you going to introduce that will have knock-on effects in terms of, maybe just to clarify, in terms of what, in terms of? In terms of, yes, ability to have all the things we're talking about. So it's not just about directly about food, but other things that might help them perhaps to access food.
Thank you. Thank you. A very deep and very wide-ranging question. I would say, if I was wanting to deflect it, which I'm not, I would say, please wait for the Liberal Democrat manifesto launch next week. Because it's all right for those who've already released their manifestos. So we've got a few more days to wait for ours. But I think actually, in seriousness, to answer your question, I'll go back to what I said right at the very start. In my opening remarks, I was seeking to, at least in highlight, make the connections across the whole range of areas where we know things just don't quite work the way we want them to in Scotland, whether it's tackling poverty properly, whether it's our public transport system, where there aren't buses in the right places at the right time, certainly in the borders. I mean, we might have fabulous food, but the buses could do with a bit of help. And way beyond, we go back into the education system. I mean, a few of us have talked tonight about apprenticeships and opportunities to kind of, encourage our young people into many dimensions of the food industry, including agriculture, and on and on. I think it's a very, very difficult question that you've raised, because you're asking me to effectively kind of join together 15 different areas of policy in a manifesto, which we will do when you read it next week. But the essence is very simple. We can see, and colleagues across the border are saying the same similar things. We can see so many areas of public life and public policy where it just doesn't quite work the way we want it to. And I've alluded to some there. We could talk about health. We talk about preventative health policies to, ease the burden on the NHS. Food is inextricably linked to that. And that takes you then back into education and schools, and even school food, and on and on and on we go. I'm going to stop, Vicky, because I suspect I'm not looking at you because I probably talked for too long in an attempt to try to join up a whole series of important parts of policy. But I sense that you appreciate that the interconnectedness is what politicians often struggle with, because you end up in the silos of particular pieces of policy, and we've got to find ways of breaking out of that and doing more of the intelligent joining up that you're suggesting. Thanks, Ray.
I think it's a really good question. If we're knocking doors just now, the biggest issue we have is cost of living, by a mile, the cost of living. So we're talking around about, I talked about food inflation being around about 10%. That's going to impact on every single one of us. Here, energy costs. And too often we hear on the doorsteps about people having to heat or eat. And that's not just a saying, that actually happens in terms of that as well. So how do we bring policies forward that lessen the impact on that? I talked around about how we tackle child poverty, and I think the child payment goes a massive way towards that, and we've seen the figures. in terms of reducing that. We have the highest energy costs in Europe, and we produce a vast amount of that. And coming from our point of view, we need to bring energy regulation and how we set prices back to Scotland and our independent Scotland. It is wrong that we have the highest energy costs in Europe. It's just wrong. So we need to bring energy back to here. The regulation market is all wrong. I talked around about the issues about early childcare. So again, reducing costs on childcare is incredibly important. The Scottish Government has a really good record in terms of that as well. The other key point you mentioned was around about rent controls. I was the House Minister for 2 years and was proud that Scotland has rent controls in the only part of the UK in terms of that. So I think there's different measures in terms of that. Our manifesto doesn't come out until next week as well, but certainly we've announced some of these policies and already in practice in terms of how we tackle that. It's about putting in more money into people's pockets. It's about tackling that issue that we hear on the doorsteps. And Cara mentioned it about the issues about the food banks. People are choosing to heat or eat, and that's wrong in a country as rich as Scotland. It's just wrong.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that the Reform Manifesto came out over a week ago, so it's available for anybody that actually wants it, unlike these other manifestos. Paul talks about the cost of living and energy prices, but he fails to understand that's simply because we're pursuing the net zero agenda. Our electricity and energy is so expensive, 4 times the amount that we're paying in the US. Donald Trump said, drill, baby, drill, and he's got cheap energy. So the question is, why are we not doing that? And that's something Reform would like to see more of. We also want to reduce tax so that people have more money in their pockets to spend, reduce energy costs so the cost of production is cheaper, so the cost you pay for goods is less and food is less. We've got apprenticeships for going into abattoirs. We've got apprenticeships for going into the fishing industry. We want to make the fishing industry easier. We want to stop having any more of these offshore wind farms so that there's more room for the fishermen to actually fish. So there's lots in the Reform Manifesto to make sure that food and food production is made a lot simpler and easier for people.
Thank you. Back down to Julie.
Thanks very much for your rounded question. I'm going to give you a whistle-top tour of our manifesto that was launched yesterday. I will probably miss loads of things out and be chastised for it later. But Paul touched on it. It's putting money back into people's pockets. There is not a lot of joy at the moment around us, and people are not spending, particularly in the hospitality industry, or going out, and they are struggling to heat and to feed themselves. So the first thing we would probably do is bring back the cold winter payment. I think that's really important for our pensioners. We would allow pensioners particularly to claim back from their pensions the first £500. I don't believe that if you've worked hard for this in this country all your working life, by the time you get to 70 or 75, you should be paying tax on your pensions. I don't think that does them a justice. Cut taxes, I said some of this earlier, putting money back into people's pockets from the energy that we produce on a household basis, and also on a household basis from the money that is underspent and sitting in the Scottish Government. I think we spend more money on sport and activities to try and bring down obesity, and also make sure that people could get faster GP appointments, which also indicated some form of social prescribing, so that you could be linked directly. We're doing that in the Borders. We have an organisation called Live Borders that runs all our leisure services, and our GPs there can social prescribe into the leisure facilities at a reduced cost to get people moving. Buses are really important. Everybody forgets about buses. In rural areas, buses either kill or cure you, and we had a lack of them. So what we've done in the Borders particularly is run our own bus services. If we can't get anybody else to do it, let's do it ourselves and join everything up. And I think there needs to be more funding for that to local authorities to allow them to move outside the regulations that exist. Because if you can't get to the supermarket, or you have to wait forever to get back from the supermarket on a bus, it's just depressing for people, and we need to get better than that. And I think that we also need to think about our education system. It's not as good as it was. We need to think about those children particularly, and we've got a lot of additional needs now in our schools where there are other vocational ways to learn in education. It's not all pushed towards university, but there's lots of other jobs. We talked about amateur jobs. There'll be very few colleges across Scotland that offer those courses, and we need to get back to that to fill the jobs that we need to fill to make us a much more prosperous nation.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks. The Scottish Greens manifesto is coming out on the 14th of April. So starting in the home, we need to kind of continue the program of improving homes so that they're well insulated, so that people are not heating the sky and they're actually just heating the space they're living in. We need to take the power to de-link gas and electricity, and that's held at Westminster. So there's an independence argument there. We're completely beholden to what's being decided there, and I think that's something that we need to if we could de-link gas and electricity, our electricity prices would drop immensely. So I think that's something that's really important to do. In terms of renting, for people who rent, we just had the Housing Act come through, and the Scottish Greens want to fix the rent controls where the government had it come in at an increase of 1% on connected to CPI. What we would like to do is make it connected to wage inflation, so it actually relates to the amount of money that people are earning. Then also kind of connected to the home is we want to bring in universal childcare. So we already have some aspects of that, but we want to see that eventually progress to universal childcare. This is all about addressing the cost of living and keeping money in people's pockets. And then when you leave the home, how do people get out and about? So we were instrumental in bringing about the under 22s bus pass. What we want to see now is we want to move in the direction of free bus travel, and that's what we'll be pushing for in the next session, free bus travel for everyone in Scotland. And along with the Scot card, that means that you have one card that gets you from a bus to a train to a ferry. Whatever mode of transport you're using, it's easy. This is kind of normal in other European countries, so let's have it in Scotland. We can demonstrate that that's already happening. So in the Highlands and Islands, there is a very exciting pilot of a £2 bus cap for anyone between the ages of 22 and 59. So you can get on a bus anywhere in the Highlands and Islands region for £2. So if you live in that region, please make use of this, because it's a pilot for a year, and we need to show that there is a need. But I really agree with some of the comments around we absolutely need to have the bus services in our rural communities in the first place, and it's something that I always call for. Greens were instrumental in bringing forward the possibility of community ownership of bus services, and that's something that we want to see. We want to see bus services taken out of the private hands and publicly owned. We have a fantastic example here in Edinburgh of Lothian buses. Let's have that across the whole of Scotland. We need to see bus services as infrastructure and public service, not something that's for private profit. I already mentioned the free school meals before, but I think that's another part of accessing good food. And there are many more things, but look out for the manifesto and eat your heart out reading it.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to take it as an invitation to laser focus in on poverty. Our manifesto is not out till Monday, but poverty is that important to us that I already know most of what's going to be in there because we put it out there, we've defended it. We're also building on the UK government's amazing achievement in removing the 2-child cap, which in this city alone has delivered 2,000 children out of poverty. I think I'm stealing Trussell words to say that hunger's not a food problem; it's an income problem. So when we're talking about food poverty, it all goes hand in hand. And I think we're in agreement here. But we have to take a moment to really sit with the fact that people are hungry in this country, in this city right now, and it's a disgrace. And all of our policies are designed to tackle that, to name it, to shine a light on it, and to practically deal with the fact that we still have 1 in 4 children living in poverty. So we are intending to promote free breakfast clubs into every primary school. We will, of course, keep free school meals, but we'll also review the threshold for them. I've already discussed the family network hubs, which are building on the great success of Sure Start principles. We know that poverty is multifaceted. We will absolutely, as a priority, address the housing emergency that we're in. Within Edinburgh, we've got 3,000 children living in temporary accommodation. I support families with disabled children in my work. They're living in temporary accommodation. They're not safe. It's not suitable. It's not okay. We'll build 125,000 new homes. We'll help with energy costs. We'll expand the eligibility for home upgrades. We know that people shouldn't be choosing between eating and heating. They should be able to do both absolutely on their own terms in their own homes. We'll top up tax-free childcare so that working parents will get £3,000 per child. And we'll get 2 weeks of funded holiday clubs for the summer period for parents. All of this will be transformative. All of this is laser focused, as I said, on dealing with poverty, the causes of poverty, its multifaceted nature, and delivering for our young people and our families and all of the thousands and thousands of people who will be hungry tonight.
Thanks so much, Ellen. I think we've come to the end there. I don't know if you knew that you were just going to give everyone a brilliant opportunity to deliver their whole manifestos or just flag up when theirs was coming down the line. But it was also a great question. I'm just going to sort of wrap up a bit now. I mean, I think we can all agree it's been a very interesting evening. Interesting to see how much consensus there's been, although obviously not totally on net zero and maybe a few other things, but a lot on things like even salmon farming, abattoirs. There's a lot of people coming together. And I think that says something about the nature of the challenges around food. So I think we've just about got time for people maybe to give a sort of final, I'm thinking like one sentence. And what I think I'd like is something on what do you think is the most important point you feel you want to get across from tonight about what or how we change the food system? Just a sentence. I know that's a challenge. Who's got to go in for it first? Oh, okay. It's you, Ray.
Well, it'll be a long sentence, but I'll do it quickly. I want to leave you with an example which I think illustrates a number of so many of the things that many of us are expressing tonight. And this is a brilliant business in the Borders again. And Julie, you'll know them in Huyken. They're called Sweet Red Balls. Bear with me, because you'll know them. So they're Scotland's only commercial tomato grower. They have a system that utilises methane from the farm, from the dairy slurry, in a gas engine that generates green electricity. They use 2 wood chip boilers, again for local fuel production, with the wood harvested sustainably from their own woodlands. So they've diversified their farm. They are producing the sort of food that we need so much more of
Maybe
in
that was
Scotland.
5 sentences, but...
It was 5 sentences, but you get the picture. We just need so much more of that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it to a sentence. Scotland leads the way in tackling child poverty. There is no doubt about that, and the statistics prove that. I think Scotland leads the way in terms of what it had with the Good Food Nation Act. In terms of that, I think one of the key things is food impacts on every single one of us, and we've got to realise that. I think there's a real role in terms of how we embed that, not just in terms of everybody in the room here, but there's a role for all of us how we embed that across our communities, and that would be the one key message I would leave with everybody tonight.
Thank you.
Well, my key message is to let the farmers farm. Let's get rid of all these rewilding projects, the solar parks, the battery farms and all the rest of it. We need to use the land to produce food, not go for net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Just do it on my way.
Okay, yeah, you can just do it that way.
We'll tackle food poverty, we'll promote food sovereignty, and we'll push decisions and decision-making as close as possible to the communities that they directly affect.
I think the one thing that I'd love to see happen in the next session is a human rights bill that has food, the right to food, and a healthy environment at the heart of it. And I think the work that all of you have done, the coalition has done, of getting the Good Food Nation Act forward, the next step is that human right to food. So that's the thing that I want to work on with all of you in the next session. So looking forward to doing that.
And mine is very simply that everyone has access to the food that they need and they want to be able to eat. And Scotland is full of wonderful, wonderful food producers, and we should be celebrating and supporting them, not trying to do them down.
Fantastic. Thanks so much to all our candidates and to all you out there and people out there in the world of Slido. Yeah, and I've got a lovely long list of communities I now want to contact, so that was great. Thank you. Is there anything else I need to say before everyone? No? Okay, great. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. That was fun.